Is the Norwegian 4x4 method really the best session to improve your VO2max? In this video, we're going to look at where this belief comes from, what this endurance training expert thinks about it, and finally, I'll share with you 2 high-intensity training sessions that you can start with no matter what your current level is so that you can still improve your VO2max. So thanks to my friend David Lippman for putting me on the trail of that study where it seems like this 4x4 method comes from. So this study from 2007 that actually compared over 3 sessions per week for 8 weeks, compared low intensity training, threshold training, the 4x4 method, and also 15 on, 15 off high intensity format. And they were looking at which session has the biggest impact on improving VO2 max. And fair enough, in the conclusions of the study, you can see that high aerobic intensity endurance interval training is significantly more effective than performing the same total work at either lactate threshold or at 70% heart rate max in improving VO2 max. So based on this study alone, sure, you can say that compared to those other ways of training, this training session 3 times a week over 8 weeks will have the biggest effect on your VO2 max. But then again, it depends on the population that they tested. It depends on your starting level. It depends on what you're currently doing in training as well. And there are other studies that look at different intensity formats that will yield better or worse times close to VO2 max and also outcomes when it comes to improving that VO2 max. But I think it's a huge problem if all we do is look at a study and say, this study said this works better than that, so we're just going to do this for the rest of our life, because we know that this is not the way training works. You need variation in training, you need progression in training, you need a balance of different endurance qualities. And if you only do one type of training session all the time, well, guess what? You're going to be really good in that realm, but then everything else is going to fall off the wayside and you're not going to be as complete an athlete as you can be. And worse still, if your competition requires you to, for example, sustain an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours at significantly high power outputs or speeds, well, if you only train VO2 max, this is not going to translate to the best performance possible on those types of formats. But like I said, don't take it from me. Let's look at what Steven Seiler, one of the biggest names in endurance training research, has to say about high intensity interval training. And for this, we're going to look at his paper from 2024 titled "It's All About the Long Game, Not Epic Workouts, Unpacking High Intensity Interval Training for Endurance Athlete." And you kind of guessed where this was going. A little tickle at my CrossFit friends over here. But obviously, if you want progress in the long term, there's not just the best workout that you're going to do all the time. If that was the case, then everybody would just be doing that one workout. And we all know, for those that work in the field with athletes or just with people that want to get fitter, you're not just repeating the same session week in and week out and extending that 8-week study to the rest of your life. So let's see what he's saying here. And one of the big concepts that come out of this paper, I highly recommend that you go read it. It's free access. You can find the link in the description. He talks about optimization being more important than maximization. So here he says, long-term endurance training is an optimization problem, not a maximization problem. Optimization means that more is not necessarily better, and effective HIIT prescription is best achieved by balancing both acute and long-term goals. So again, when we look at that 8-week study, that 8-week window, this is a very short-term perspective. And again, we're not controlling for what the training was before or who was doing or going through the study or the intervention. And we need to balance this with long-term goals. And then he says, the optimization of HIIT cannot be seen in isolation. Accumulated signaling from all exercise stimuli, including HIIT, must be balanced to ensure sustainable overall cellular signal versus systemic stress management across days, weeks, and months of training. And that thought process is the same when we look at, for example, sprint interval studies that show that over a 6-week period, they yield a better improvement in VO2 max than even high intensity interval training. Yeah, sure. But you did wind gates 3 times a week for 6 weeks. Guess what? You're not going to do wind gates 3 times a week for the rest of your life. For those who haven't tried it, try to go 30 seconds absolutely all out on the bike, rest for 3 or 4 minutes, and do that 3 or 4 times. That's one session. And then you do that 3 times in the week. And then let's see how many weeks you're going to hold before you give up sports altogether. Joking aside, the point is not to find the best session. The point is to combine sessions in an intelligent manner so that you can progress now and in the future as well. And again, this is going to require variation and a balanced approach between the different types of training. And continuing with Seiler's paper, here's probably one of the most important sentences that I've picked up. He says it is important to see HIIT in the context of the many hours of low intensity training that need to be performed for optimal health and adaptation over time. Low intensity training and high intensity training are best seen as synergistic in adaptive effects over months and years of regular endurance training. So again, it's not about the epic workout, it's about a balanced approach to training over time. Now, can you make good progress with only doing high intensity training? Sure, it's going to work until the stress that you apply with that high intensity becomes too big relative to your recovery capacity. And this is where the balance between the high and the low intensity comes in, because if you do enough low intensity, it actually increases your work capacity, increases your recovery capacity, increases your ability to work hard on those really difficult sessions. And once you put both together, you have a balanced training plan. And I don't think you have to subscribe to the 80-20 method or anything like this. You just have to find a balance that makes the training achievable and recoverable over long periods of time. Because even if this is the best method over 8 weeks, guess what? It's not going to be the best way over 10 years of training. So we need to vary our stimuli and we need to find a balance with all those elements of training. That being said, high intensity interval training is a really potent training method. And here are a few sessions that I would recommend you choose to begin with instead of the Norwegian 4x4. So here you can visually see that Norwegian 4x4 that we hear talked about online a lot. 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, as hard as you can. So RPE 10, RPE being rating of perceived exertion, how hard you're actually working on those intervals. And so this is kind of the starting point for this conversation. So I wanted you to see it visually. Now, what I would recommend for you to get started, if you've never done high intensity interval training, a 4x4 in that way is a great training session. It's a very, very hard training session. And I don't think that, mentally speaking, the point is to go all out on every single hard session that you do. By keeping a little bit in the tank, you give yourself some margin so that you can progress on the next training session. And I'll just show you how just now. I would actually start with short VO2max intervals. And I would start with something like this, 2 times 10 intervals of 30 seconds hard and 30 seconds either easy or stopped. And I would start with an RPE of 8. Why 8? Because then we are above the second threshold in terms of intensity, and you are going to have some room to progress that intensity. So I'll take my example. My second threshold currently on the bike is around 230 watts. So I might do those at 270. I could go higher, but that would yield a fairly manageable sessions to start. And then on the next session, I can either add intervals or I can just up the intensity, but at least I have room to grow. And again, it's about accumulating quality sessions over time, over weeks, over months, over years. And this is what's going to yield the best results. So then you can progress towards, for example, 3 sets of 12, 30 on, 30 off, and an RPE of 9.5. Of course, you could go all out on one of those sessions and do a RPE 10, but the point is, again, to accumulate progress over time and accumulate work over time. Once you've done that progression over a bunch of sessions, over a bunch of weeks, depending on your training schedule, I would then come and densify this work a little bit. And I would take the first format at the top, 2 times 10 times 30 on, 30 off, and I would cut the rest in half. So I would make the rest periods 15 seconds. And then I would progress that again over a few weeks, increasing either the intensity or the number of intervals that you do on every session. For example, 2 by 10, and then 2 by 12, and then 2 by 14, and then maybe 3 by 8, and then 3 by 10, and then 3 by 12. So again, you can just progress like this session by session, and again, increase the intensity if you need to. And once you've run that progression, so that's already going to give you a few months of training off the bat, then I would go to the longer VO2 max interval. And sure, 2 minutes on is not very long, but believe me, at the beginning, that's all you need. And it's better to start easy and to move up in difficulty, not just start off with the hardest session that you can imagine. Because again, we want room to grow. So start with 5 by 2, and then you can progress to 6x2 to 7x2, maybe even 8x2. And then we can make that 2 minutes a little bit longer, and we can move to a few more intervals, and we can go to 3, maybe to 4 minutes. And I would actually recommend cutting the rest down a little bit. It seems like adding more rest above 2 minutes doesn't yield a huge difference. Sure, you won't be able to go as hard on the following ones, but if your point is to build VO2 max, you'll probably be better off with doing more intervals. And it seems like, as per Steven Seiler's paper, it does look like training intensity and the AWD, which is the accumulated work in total. So for example, that first session, 5x2, that's 10 minutes of work, right? So you start with that 10 minutes in your mind, and the next sessions you go to 12, and then you go to 14, and then you go to 16, and then you go to 18. That's already a solid VO2max session. Obviously, highly trained endurance athletes will go well above 20 minutes of total work time on those high intensity training sessions. But whether you do, let's say 16 minutes as a baseline, whether you do 8x2 or 4x4, it is not the same session, or even a 2x8, right? Those longer intervals at high intensity are going to be much harder on the legs, on the mind as well. More time under tension, if you will. Obviously, they're great sessions. I'm not saying don't train hard. I'm just saying train smart so that you can train hard for the rest of your life, because this is what really matters. It's about accumulating quality work over time. Since we're talking about high intensity intervals, if you have a hard time breathing during your training, I just launched a brand new respiratory training program. Click on the link in the description if you want to learn more about it and join this new Breath Master program. I hope you enjoyed this format, which was a little bit different than the other videos that I've put out recently. Make sure you ask your questions below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.